How the hell did the ancient people manage to build these insane megalithic structures and then, of course, leave essentially nothing behind that would show how they built any of this stuff? Now, I hear you. Some of you out there are saying, it's aliens, bro. I mean, it's obviously aliens. And then there is another school of thought that's over there saying, nuh-uh, it's just people with wooden sledges and copper tools, and all they did was just, carve up some blocks, and there they are. I mean, what do you want from us? And then there's another school of people who are right now screaming, no, they cast them. They are all geopolymers. And then there's another school of thought which says, no, they actually used some sort of a biochemical extracted from a plant and softened the stone. These are probably the four main perspectives that I see when it comes to trying to explain away, or not explain away, but to explain how the hell all of these megalithic structures were created on this planet. So in this show, what I want to do is I want to go over some of the more popular ideas of how all of these insane structures were built. And we're only going to go into the block portion. We're not going to get too crazy into other structural problems with a lot of these buildings, or megalithic structural problem. You know what I mean? I'm not going to go into all the other details. What I want to focus on in this show specifically is just the megalithic blocks themselves. We're not going to go too much into anything like, how did they drag the stone over, or, well, okay, maybe we will go over some of that because some of that will matter. But anyway, that's what we're going to do here. And what we are going to do, or how we are going to approach this problem, is that we are going to use our critical thinking skills and the scientific method. And we are just going to look for the evidence that supports the various hypotheses, I don't know. And then what we'll do is we'll see where that takes us. So this is basically going to be a critical thinking exercise. So if you're wondering, do I have an answer for this? Not right now, but maybe when we get to the end of the show, we will have a better direction of where we can look to try and find the answer. Now, this subject is actually extremely important because if we can figure out what kind of technology our ancestors had in the ancient past, I mean, that opens up an entire avenue of history for us. If we can prove how our ancestors did this, and we, without, beyond a shadow of a doubt, if we can legitimately say, hey, look, our ancestors had access to X, Y, or Z skills or technology or whatever, I mean, that changes everything. That changes all of history immediately. And because the answer to this question would indeed change all of history, which is why the mainstream essentially wants nothing to do with this, right? And even on the alternative side of the historical research community, whatever, even on that side, if we could prove the technology that built it, you would then have a lot of alternative historians, their theories also go out the window. Now, psychologically, how often do humans like to admit that they're wrong? Right? Almost never, unfortunately. We now live in a society that is absolutely based on just 100% individualism and ego. That's all it is nowadays. I mean, and that describes how academia is to a T. There's no one in academia nowadays who's looking to be proved wrong, right? I mean, especially if you hold, or they hold, any kind of a high-level authoritative position within their arena of thought, or within their culture that they have built over there on completely poisonous principles, I might add. Anyway, the point is that nobody in the mainstream is interested in changing the current paradigm in such a way that it invalidates their life's work. And let's be honest, here's a big part of it, and I understand it from a humanistic psychology perspective, but the reality is, if somebody has built their entire career on what is essentially a lie, are those people really going to listen to somebody who's going to come in and just absolutely obliterate their entire life? And of course, generally the answer is no. Unfortunately, however, that is not how we do science. That is not how you employ critical thinking. That is not how we do this stuff. So mainstream is never going to budge. Now this causes us a problem because mainstream has access to all of the tools, or at least a lot of the tools, that would really be helpful in proving or disproving certain theories. Right? They have all the technology over there. The alternative historian generally does not. And it gets even worse because nobody is going to offer anybody else with differing opinions access to any of these tools, or even access to the sites themselves, so that real science can actually take place. How do you like that? It's crazy, right? You're not even allowed to test any of these ruins anymore. Like, these things are locked down by their respective governments nowadays. The second a government has to lock something down and refuse any kind of scientific inquiry into how, these things were built, or into anything really over there. I mean, this stuff is crazy important. There's nothing more frustrating. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing honest archaeologists being denied the ability to go and test structures. I understand that we don't want to destroy them, but a lot of these tests don't require any of that. Even more important, even if it did destroy a little bit of it, who cares? We are looking for the truth about where the hell humans come from. This is extremely important. It's extremely important to every single human on this planet. So the fact that we find governments standing in the way of the sciences that could objectively prove, or at least bring some new information out about where the hell all of these structures came from, why they were built, how they were built, etc. The fact that we're being denied access to these things is insane. In fact, so far as I am concerned, that is all the proof I need to know that the mainstream institutions who hold all the authority on how a lot of the stuff is taught and run, these people are not interested in the truth. So if our mainstream institutions are not interested in the truth, what do we do with that? That is objective corruption right in front of us. The very second that we are not allowed to scientifically do something to try to make discoveries that are intrinsically important to the human species, something's up. There's got to be something up. Otherwise, there's no reason to do it. Seriously, why block out any kind of scientific investigation that might lead us towards the truth about what the hell our ancestors were capable of and what they were doing back in the day? And what they had to deal with. All of that stuff. This is all what everybody on this planet should be worried about. And why should everybody be worried about this? Who cares? These people died 2,000 years ago. Why does it really matter that we know the truth about those people? That's a legitimate question, but holy crap, is that a horrible question too. Every single human should have this question baked into their psyche with a desire to know what the heck is going on. And actually, I would argue that every human does do that. However, right now, mainstream institutions have ready-made answers that will fill in the holes that those questions bring. And most people are pretty good with just absorbing the mainstream answer and going on with that. And by the mainstream answer, I'm not just talking about corrupt academia, right? So if we look at the megalithic block situation, which that's what we're talking about. If we look at that situation, what we find is that mainstream academia hand waves anything that does not fall into a very basic caveman style of building. I'll just keep it like that for now. Right? Everything is very basic, very caveman. That's how it's done. Don't question it. Don't you dare question that. Okay, so that's obviously poison. Right? We're allowed to question everything because as we gain more knowledge, our questions will get better. And that is exactly what has happened with regard to these megalithic structures and the problem of all of these megalithic structures. Now, there's tons of problems with the megalithic structures. In this show, we're just going to focus on the blocks. So bear with me. If I'm not talking about, alignments and all these other kinds of things, that's for other shows. We'll deal with that later. Because what's really interesting about this subject is the very basic ingredient that makes these structures is the block, right? But these blocks are amazing. You know, you initially think it's simple. You know, you see like the Great Pyramid, and most people just think, yeah, whatever. They carved a bunch of, sandstone blocks or whatever and threw it on, and there it is. Done. Or it's simple. You just do that and you're done. What we find is that simple answers like that, unfortunately, resonate with the general public. And it resonates with them for several different reasons. So the first reason why a very basic, simple, stupid explanation, objectively stupid by the way, would resonate with your average person is that your average person, it's not that your average person is stupid, it's just that your average person doesn't care. And that's really one of the core fundamental problems that we find with this subject. Because why the hell does your average person not care about these structures? And the answer to that question is simple. Most people have been taught that there is no reason to care about any of these things. One of the things that I find unbelievably fascinating about the humans, about what has been done psychologically to the world's population in general, and I guess I could say the Western population, but this stuff is spilling out over the entire planet. So really, I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody on this planet that is not really affected by this kind of a mindset nowadays. But the reality is, the mainstream institutions, they basically either don't talk about it at all, which is actually probably the real huge crime. Well, hold on, we'll get to that. Or they give you the pre-made answer that we just kind of covered, right? They just carve some blocks and bricks and whatever, using caveman tools, and they slot them in. And think about it. I mean, they're just rocks being stacked, right? You don't really need to pay attention to that. Look at what we build nowadays with steel and sheetrock and all of this stuff. Our ancestors were just monkeys. They were just using what they had, and what they had was stone, and stone is very easy to cut technically. Right? That is the explanation. So first of all, people are basically not even taught to pay attention to this stuff anyway. And then those people that do pay attention, a lot of them are then dissuaded by the fact that it seems like the mainstream institutions have all of this figured out. And unfortunately, since your average person is not a stonemason, right? We're not all sitting there carving stones all day. When somebody says, yeah, you bang some rocks against another rock, or you bang some metal against a rock, you can shape rock into whatever you want. And the reality is that explanation is fine for your average person, right? And it's fine for your average person for the reasons I just gave. This is unfortunate, but what it shows us is that really the fact that the mainstream would go out of their way to very, very specifically frame a problem like this in such a light, i.e. a light that allows easy dismissal, that allows easily to move on and away from the subject. So in my opinion, that's a problem. And it's a problem because if our governments or our academic institutions were truly interested in the science, right? They really truly trusted the science, we would not see answers like that. In fact, it would be the opposite. These authoritative institutions really should be welcoming anybody, anybody who is able to bring new scientific evidence to the table. This is what we should be looking for. Whenever we find somebody that's writing a book, and that book has scientific principles baked into it that prove the postulate of this case, for example, how the hell these megalithic structures were built, or at least the stone blocks were created, that should have been welcomed. These supposed scientific institutions should be welcoming these people with open arms. Because if somebody is bringing scientific data to the table, we are obligated as critical thinkers and scientists to go over that evidence. It is a requirement of you as a historian, as a chronologist, and as a scientist to do this. All right, so I've been ranting this whole time about the mainstream. We get it. Mainstream is garbage. All right, fine. So where does this leave us? Well, this leaves us with a legitimate scientific problem. If the mainstream institutions cannot be trusted, then what do? There's a side problem to this as well, because if mainstream institutions are going to be corrupt on something like ancient history, that really speaks volumes about maybe the implications of why stuff is being hidden or lied about. All right, so yeah, it's a different show, I think. But isn't that interesting? I mean, why, why even go out of your way to try to falsify this kind of stuff? I mean, why is the mainstream obsessed with sticking to one garbage story that leads nowhere and is unprovable and there's no reason to believe it anyway? I mean, why do they stick to this story and they do it to their deathbed? I mean, nobody's going to change their mind. Why? Well, you only do that if you have something to hide. So why would you hide something about, stone? Like why would you do that? Like, it's stone, right? Initially, it sounds very simple. Why would you hide the ability to carve a stone? It's a good question. Why would you hide that ability? Well, the reason why you would hide it is because if we use our observational skills and we look at megalithic blocks that have been discovered all over this planet, it becomes immediately apparent that the people who are building these people were not Ooga Booga cave people. There's no way. Ooga Booga cave people are not putting together geometric blocks. They are not constructing temples relative to possible star configurations. They are not, what they certainly are not going to be, or they shouldn't be, calculating and embedding all these kinds of scientific, mathematical, and physical principles into their structures, right? This should not be possible. But what do we find? We find the exact opposite. We find that who the mainstream think are cave people, we find these people are anything but. We find that these people are well aware of what's going on in their world around them. These people do not believe the world is flat, for example. By all accounts, our ancestors were well aware that Earth was a planet. Even more interesting is that our ancestors were also aware of other planets. They knew how to differentiate planets from stars. Okay, I know I'm kind of getting off topic, but my point is I want to set the stage for where we're going to go, because mainstream gives our ancestors no credit. Like, zero credit. They are cave people through and through to mainstream academia. But we have no reason to believe that. Because we have no reason to believe that our ancestors were cave dudes, so I mean, that kind of screws up all of history. Because right now, history is taught in a way that it's like a graph chart, right? We start at the bottom at the Stone Age, and then the line just kind of slowly goes up, 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 until we have computers. That is basically how mainstream teaches history. The problem is that the evidence that we find, the physical evidence, and even the historical story evidence, everybody's mythologies and legends and histories, the stuff that the mainstream basically considers 100% fictitious. Well, all of these pieces of evidence do not support the idea that humans start in the Ooga Booga Stone Age and then eventually make it up to computers and stuff. That's not what we find. We actually find the exact opposite. Now, the fact that we find the exact opposite is what the mainstream institutions, for some weird reason, absolutely despise. You are not allowed to say that, hey, look, humans, for whatever reason, appear to start out higher on the technology chart than the mainstream puts them on. In fact, they start really high on the technology chart. Yes, I am stupid. But anyway, what we find is we do indeed find our ancestors seemingly starting way higher, and then they degrade, and then the curve starts to go back up until we are right now where we are. And, you can argue that, that curve should probably continue to go down, because where we are right now is not exactly fantastic. I think we can all, I think you can basically see that. Anyway, my point is that the real evidence goes against the mainstream chronology, goes against the mainstream ideology. The question that this brings up is, why the hell are these people defending an obvious corrupt chronology? I mean, the mainstream is obviously wrong. You literally, all you have to do is look at their evidence. You can literally use mainstream evidence to prove mainstream wrong. It's hilarious, and we've done that in other shows, and we'll continue to do it. Okay, anyway, we got to start talking about the blocks. All right, so here's the problem. When we look back in time, or when we look all over the world back in time, we find all these kind of weird, mysterious, huge structures that display great antiquity, but they also display an unbelievable level of skill and intelligence. Now, that kind of skill and intelligence shouldn't exist if we go by the mainstream. So we're going to throw the mainstream out, because right now we can scientifically do that. There is plenty of evidence, which I'm not going to go over here because I wanted to focus on just the blocks. But the reality is, all the evidence shows that our ancestors all over the world were technologically adept to some degree. Of course, that begs the question, to what degree? And that's what I want to go over right now. So I want to go and look and analyze some of the theories, and initially maybe some of them might seem schizo. Actually, okay, let's do this. There's only one real theory that might sound a little schizo, and that is the theory of aliens building all of this stuff. Yeah, let's just start here. We might as well start with aliens, and let's go from there. So, I'm going to give a warning before we go further. I do not hold a particular position with respect to how these stones were made. I'll be completely honest with you. Well, obviously I'm going to be honest with you, but the reason why I'm doing this show is because I don't have a theory. I have no idea. But what I have seen is I have seen really good scholarship, really good science, and scientists, go out of their way to possibly prove, using evidence, both scientific and historical, going out of their way to actually prove that, hey, our ancestors had access to techniques that, we don't have access to now. But it's semi-difficult to prove, and we'll get into that after. Well, let's get into that after the alien theory. All right, so let's tackle aliens right off the bat. So, I'll be honest, the alien thing right now does not sit well with me, and the reason why it does not currently sit well with me is because we don't have the evidence for it. If the Egyptian pyramids were covered in gray aliens, moving blocks with their mind or with sound or whatever, that would be different, right? That would be something that you'd be like, I mean, maybe gray aliens did it. I don't know, bro. It shows them all over the hieroglyphs doing it. Maybe that's what they did. We don't have that, though, do we? Right? And I know maybe some of you out there can say, well, I know this one hieroglyph that kind of looks like a gray alien doing something. Or what about the light bulbs? What about them? What about the light bulbs? I mean, it's nothing to do with making these bricks, as far as I can tell. Anyway, I know, whatever. My main point is that we do not find direct evidence that would implicate some kind of extraterrestrial life form. The reality is we don't find it. Now, here's one thing that I will say with respect to hieroglyphs and extraterrestrials, or something different. Let's say that. The reality is we actually do find hieroglyphs, and I'm going to call this out just in case anybody thinks I'm not doing my due diligence. But there are hieroglyphs that really do indeed seem to show a different kind of human existing. And by that I mean these humans are generally larger. These humans generally have elongated skulls. And I mean, they're portrayed there on the hieroglyphics. I mean, obviously, that's not, it's not really a human that we would think about, right? And for those of you right now who are saying, no, but they used to deform cranial deformation. That's where the conehead people came from. Well, there's fantastic and excellent scientific scholarship that has already been done, including genetic evidence, including all the biological evidence, including all of the doctors and everything corroborating all of the evidence that have been found with respect to the elongated skull people, that these people appear to have been real. I mean, we physically have the skulls of people that were not, that cranial deformation did not take a part in the elongation of their skull. It certainly seems like that's just how these people were. Now, I only bring this up because in the alien situation, because in all honesty, it does seem to appear that maybe there was something else going on back in the day. I mean, we have the physical evidence, we have the historical evidence. You know, we have ancient cultures talking about people like this, right? We have ancient cultures talking about a higher level of being, you know, really coming to their civilization and in some cases helping out, literally forming their civilizations in some cases. So when we start to look at the alien possibility of forming, you know, stone, or these, you know, stone blocks, or whatever particular site we're looking at, there may be something more to it than initially meets the eye. Now, also, to be completely thorough, I realize that on those hieroglyphs, not only do we find potential giants with elongated skulls, but we also find little guys. There's even a hieroglyphics with like little dudes hanging out next to the humans and the big guys. I get that, and that's a real thing that exists. You know, what are those things? I have no idea, but they are there. But does that mean that those people or beings had anything to do with the construction of these temples? Maybe, as you can maybe interpret some of the evidence heading in that direction. Maybe it is possible some of those beings, people, whatever, portrayed in those hieroglyphics did indeed have something to do with the blocks. And I'm completely open to that. I don't believe that we have the complete and solid proof that it would have been those beings, you know, doing some sort of crazy extraterrestrial thing or whatever to mold some rocks. But I would be academically dishonest if I didn't mention it. And there might actually be something there. Like I said, I'm completely open to that possibility. I just personally have not seen the science or the evidence yet in any real way that would prove that that is the direction, or that is how stuff went down. So what other evidence do we have that would prove that aliens did this kind of stuff? Do we find these kind of crazy hieroglyphics anywhere else on the planet? I mean, can we find, I don't know, just like I said, can we find gray alien or predator or something on any of these other structures that would show us, yeah, okay, fine, aliens built it? And when we look around, we actually do find the occasional hieroglyph, or whatever, rock carving, whatever you want to call them. We actually do find the occasional one that could maybe be interpreted as kind of your standard alien, right? The two big bulbous eyes, and people think, oh yeah, those are aliens, look at that, these guys were recording gray aliens, they were here, that's the proof. The problem with those hieroglyphs is that those hieroglyphs only look like gray aliens to your average person because that is how you've been trained to identify that particular pattern. You know, two big eyes, kind of a bulbous head situation, or, you know, a bulbous circle around two eyes. People immediately jump to the gray alien thing. The reality is a lot of these bulbous two-eye hieroglyphs that we do find all over the world, it's a legitimate thing, right? The ancient Greeks, they used to use that as their symbol, for example, right? The owl with the two big eyes, that was a big deal for them back in the day. Why does that exist, right? We find this two big eye motif all over the place, and we may know why that exists. So that might have been the synchrotron radiation configuration that everybody on the planet would have seen during one of the catastrophes. All right, so there's a reason why we would find that kind of a hieroglyph all over the planet. It's because everybody saw it. That does not mean that they were gray aliens. In fact, it's interesting. It's completely different. It has nothing to do with aliens. How do you like that? And actually, that's kind of a really good point. Just because something looks like something that we nowadays identify as something crazy, for example, that motif of the two big bulbous eyes, you know, with kind of a bulbous circle drawn around the eyes, just because it looks like a gray alien to us now, that doesn't mean that's what it was. Right? Because all of those hieroglyphs that would kind of maybe prove the gray alien situation like I said, that can easily be attributed to a plasma configuration that everybody saw in the sky. So instead of, aliens coming down doing everything, now we just have a more realistic scientific explanation of those hieroglyphics as being our ancestors simply recording what they saw during a very particular part of one of the ancient cataclysms. Right, now that's a whole other story and subject for another time. I just want to make the point that when we see a lot of these hieroglyphs, we have to make sure that we are interpreting them honestly. So the owl configuration, the two bulbous eyes thing, there's not necessarily any real reason to interpret that as an alien. Also because, generally speaking, like I said, the Greeks made it into an owl. Other people, they don't even necessarily, or no, they may have made it into a large pregnant woman, for example, as well. There's different configurations of this. The gray alien thing is just something that we have attached to it. All right, you get the point. Holy, I'm just like talking. I just keep like repeating myself. Okay, so the alien thing, it gets weird. Now, on the other side of things, when we look at those hieroglyphics that I was just talking about with regards to the elongated skull pictures, like, ancient Egypt, they have them. Let's see if I can't put one up here. I don't know. We'll see. This is a podcast anyways. I don't have time for that. Okay, anyway, I'll try to find it. But that is an interesting hieroglyph because there's nothing to interpret. It is very plain and clear that the elongated skull people in those pictures are people. Like that, there is a very clear depiction of those beings, as well as the little guys that are like hanging off of them. Right? That is the interpretation. How do you interpret that other than anything other than some sort of a flesh and blood being? It's right there. It's straight up. There's statues of them made. There's no interpretation needed. That's the difference. So we have to be careful when we find literal, it's actually, now that I think about it even further, it's a pretty interesting depiction. The fact that ancient Egyptians at some point were carving statues of these kinds of people who were recording that they had interactions with these kind of people, and by all account, those people or beings or whatever the hell they were, they were integral in the society itself. Right? They were the kings and queens, really. At the end of the day, that's what a lot of them are depicted being. So they were ruling. Just interesting. Just something to think about. So for those of you who like to toss aside the other being, let's just say that. Let's not say aliens. Let's just say the other being hypothesis. We can't throw that away. We just can't do it. And if we're going to be honest, we have to hold on to it. Because there is legitimate evidence to believe that there was a different kind of humanoid in the past, possibly helping out. That's what we find. I don't know what else to tell you. The evidence is there. It's in the histories. It's in the legends. It's in all of that stuff. Hell, and it's in the hieroglyphics. I don't know what else to say. So the alien people, they might have something. There might be something there. So we are not going to discount the possibility of other beings being involved in some sort of human ingenuity that would have helped shape these blocks. That's an entire real possibility. The only problem with it is that we do not have the solid evidence that completely proves it. And that's what's missing, all right? All right, so the alien thing, we're not going to discard it, but we are not going to go out on a limb and say that it has to be aliens or it has to be some other kind of a life form. All right, so we've established that. All right, fine. So then what's next? How the hell, okay, fine, aliens didn't do it, but these are still some pretty crazy accomplishments. What was everybody doing? Getting high on crack and just like going to town on blocks, just like sitting there just carving stuff up, or like snorting cocaine. I don't have proof of that either. But did that, how did these people do this? These are great accomplishments, right? So if we are not going to give credit to crack or aliens, what are some of the other methods that could have been used to create these blocks? All right, so the next theory that I want to present, and I find this fascinating, and as far as I can tell, this might actually be completely legit because it's still done nowadays, and that process is using some kind of biosalve that is extracted from a red-leafed plant, that once you make this salve, you put it on the stone itself and the stone softens. Now, that sounds crazy, and I still kind of don't disagree, but it begs the question, is that a possibility? Is it possible for something biological to actually have some sort of a chemical combination that has the capability of softening stone? I suppose it's possible. So let's look into this. Let's take it seriously and let's apply some critical thinking to the proposition. And I suppose the first question that I would like to ask is, can you even soften stone? I mean, is it possible to soften stone using anything? I mean, if I give you a block of granite and I say, hey, here's all your, use any technology that we have today, but I want you to soften this granite rock. Can it be done? Do we have anything in today's technology that can do that, right? And I mean blunt force technology to soften it. I'm not talking about some sort of an ancient recipe. I mean, can we do it in today's day and age? And if we can do it, how is it done? So I've been digging around trying to find out if there's any kind of modern method that is employed today that I've just never heard about that can do this. And so far, I have not found anything. So by that, I mean, nobody seems to be using any kind of granite stone softening techniques to, mine granite or whatever. Like, nobody's doing it. It makes sense. I mean, when was the last time you saw a modern structure that looked like it employed some kind of a stone softening technique? Now, I haven't seen one, or at least as far as I know, I've never seen one, and I can't seem to find anybody that does it nowadays. All right, fine. So it does not seem like softening stone is possible with our current tech. That's interesting because, hey, if our ancestors are doing something back in the day that's pretty legendary, creating these megalithic structures out of softening stone, that means they had access to some sort of knowledge or capabilities that we don't have now. I mean, that's... See, this is why mainstream pisses me off. They should be paying attention immediately the second they find something that the ancients could do that we cannot do right now. Like that you would just think that is something people would care about in academia. All right, okay, you got it. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, so I can't find anything. That does not mean it does not exist. And I'm absolutely open to somebody showing me the light. Feel free to link something in there that a modern company today, softens granite stone. I would love to see it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Right, so fine. This leads to the next question, especially since I could not find anything done by modern technology. The next question is it even possible to soften stone? I mean, can you soften granite at all? I mean, does that concept even make sense? Right? Is this a possibility? So to prove whether or not it's possible, I mean, let's look around for some sort of evidence. I mean, is there anything out there? And oddly enough, yeah, there actually is some evidence out there. And I'm sure some of you have probably seen this stuff. Maybe you probably even saw it on one of the social media places. Somebody just links something that's, side semi-interesting that everybody just, oh, wow, interesting. And then everybody forgets, right? And these are, we actually find human footprints in stone. We find human handprints in stone. We find animal hoof prints or animal prints in general in hard stone. And some of this stone is granite. It's all kinds of stones, really. But we find these kinds of footprints, handprints, prints in general in stone that there's no reason for these things to ever exist in. I mean, go to some granite right now and try to get your handprint in there, right? You're not doing it. You would have to chisel out the stone to get a handprint in there. But what we find with these animal prints and these human prints is that the way that they are created is not by being chiseled, but by being actually physically touched and having pressure applied. You can see the molding of the rock itself in these prints. This tells us that these prints were not created by carvings, but somehow were pushed into the rock. The next question is like, how the hell do you do that? Well, I don't know, but the main point is that the only way that you could have done something like that is if the stone itself was soft. Like, if the stone was in a softer state, then you'd have no problem creating those results. Yeah, and even more interestingly, like these are the stones that we even find. Yeah, I know the Christian, the religious people love this one. We find stones with what looks to be dinosaur footprints and human footprints basically running. And that's another thing that's interesting. When we look at these prints are not done in such a way that it is artistic. These prints are done in a way to where it literally looks like things are running or are active. These creatures were not stopping to put their prints in soft stone because it was fun and funny. These prints are there on accident, I would say. Nobody was trying to find soft stone to put a print in. It looks like these prints were created during actual activity. What does that even mean? I don't know. It's just crazy stuff. I mean, why are we finding any kind of footprint at all in these stones? Even more hilarious, these footprints and everything they find, by the way. Of course, geologists end up dating all of these rocks to 10 bajillion years ago. And then a side of the alternative history has latched on to these particular dates, and now they claim that humans are 10 billion years old, and humans have been here forever because mainstream geology has dated this rock to 10 billion years ago. And it's a horrible cycle, and we got to get away from that. I just find that funny that anyway. How did these footprints and everything get there? And why was the stone soft? I mean, what the hell softens the stone? The weird thing about the footprints and all of these things in the stone is that it does not appear like any of these prints were made in a construction area. By that I mean it does not appear that people were building, huge megalithic structures in the area. So yeah, maybe you would expect to find maybe some stone laying on the ground that got knocked over or something, right? I mean, what's creating the softness of the stone? And I don't know. These stones, they're found out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes. I mean, they're found all over the place, let's be honest. But they're not found in an area to where you would expect ancient people building something, as there's no evidence for that. It's just basic, nature that people find these prints in. So this begs the question, what process was being employed that softened the stone before these people and these animals ran through it? If it's not an area to where humans, I don't know, maybe somebody could have spilled a bucket of it on the granite stone, and then everybody suddenly ran away and they ran through it. You could see that. I would expect to maybe find that in a construction zone. But we don't see it in a construction zone. We find these things all over the place, which means that possibly the process of softening stone took place, I don't know, somehow naturally in the middle of nowhere without the hand of an artificial intelligence. And of course, that begs the question, what natural process would do that out in the middle of nature, right? For these people and these animals to run through it. So the idea is that there was some sort of a plant that people knew how to extract some sort of a chemical from and rub it on a stone and it would soften. So if we're dealing with a plant, that means the plant had to grow. I mean, it's got to be out there in nature somewhere. So I wonder if maybe certain areas had a lot of this plant. And, any area that, this plant was growing around, maybe possibly the stone gets softened by the leaves falling off of the plant over time or something like that. Like, that's not an impossibility. What's even more interesting is that the plant thing, okay, let's do this. That probably sounded schizo at first, but here's the deal. This is what the ancestors in South America talk about. They talk about a reddish leafed plant that if you took the leaves, it would essentially soften stone, and it also softens metal as well, apparently. One of the ways that a Westerner found out about this was back in the exploration days in South America, is that this guy had actually walked through a field of this red plant, and he just walked through it, no problem. And when he got through the field and he got back to camp, he looked down and he saw that the spurs that were on his shoes were essentially melted. They're practically gone. And he was like, what the hell? They were just on there like 2 hours ago. And now, it's not that they fell off. They were literally just deformed and melted. And so the guy's like scratching his head going, what the hell is going on? One of the native guides he was with asked him, hey, did you find and walk through a field of some sort of a red plant? And he was like, yeah, I did that. And then the native was like, yep, that's what happens, man. That plant, that's what that plant does. It just absolutely softens and annihilates stone and metal. So then the explorer was like, what the hell? And then the native was actually like, yeah, man, where did you walk? Let's go find it. Anyway, they went out to go try to find that field, and apparently they were not able to locate it again. Now that sucks, and I know that sounds like, wow, that's very typical. Wow, how convenient. And I don't disagree, but hey, it is what it is. One more thing as well, when the guide, was told about the plant and he knew about it, he also made it very clear. He said straight up, that's the plant that the Incas used to make their stone structures. Like the native already knew this. Like, it was already known to his people. So it's interesting to see that we have physical evidence that an explorer is finding, and then it's corroborated and backed up by the South American natives. Just interesting, and unfortunately for now it kind of has to be anecdotal or whatever. But it does not end there. South America actually seems to have a lot of these very interesting tales told by people back in the day that probably really would have had no way of knowing each other in any real sense. So you have multiple people experiencing this apparent stone softening gel or whatever the hell these plants emit or whatever the hell it is. Okay, so anyway, the next thing that we find around 1911, there's more explorers down there and they're doing their thing, right? So they go and they find some Inca graves and they start exploring the graves, and they end up finding a small jar of some sort of a weird thick liquid. So they bring it back to camp, and after some bantering and stuff like that, they try to dare some dude to drink it, and it's a native, and the native says, hell no, and runs away. All right, fine. But as he runs away, he knocks over, I think they're all drinking as well, but, they were daring each other to see who would drink this sludge from the tombs. And of course, the native was like, hell no, bro, I ain't drinking that. And he actually ends up kind of running away from the group. As he does this, in the commotion, that jar gets knocked over. After everybody's laughing their ass off, they go back to the jar, and what they find is that the liquid has spilled onto a rock, and this rock is as pliable as wet cement now. And everybody there is like, their minds are just blown, like, what the hell? Anyway, we find all kinds of stories like this, interestingly enough, from all the explorers, not all the explorers, but we find events like this in a lot of explorations of South America. So perhaps there is something to the possibility of a plant having some sort of a biochemical that allows people to soften rocks. I mean, it's weird. One more quick bit of evidence. What explorers also noticed down there in South America is that there was a bird that would grab this red leaf and it would rub it on rock until it was soft. And then the bird would pick away at the stone. It's just weird, right? So even birds are using the leaves to soften rock and use it for their advantage. Anyway, you see these things and it's like, why would anybody make up this garbage? Like, why would you go out of your way to lie about something that's kind of stupid like this? I mean, it's just weird. I'm not saying that these aren't lies, but I don't really have any reason to believe that they are a lie. Besides, if you're going to lie about stuff, why would you waste your time lying about some little plant thing? And please remember, the way that these things are discussed in these books, I mean, they're just little side events. They are not taking up an entire chapter or a giant section in any of these explorers' books. They're just saying, hey, look, this happened during our adventures. It was interesting, and we moved on. To me, that kind of gives it a little bit of credence, especially when you have so many people talking about it from various angles. It gets even more interesting. So let's get to the science side of this. Oh, you know what? Hold on, really quick. Before we go further, you might be wondering if you're still skeptical of the plant thing, and I'm still with you as well. Let's frame it in another way. If we look at the planet Earth through a perspective of an engineer, let's do this, just for fun, really fast, 2 seconds. Let's just say that Earth was indeed engineered, and I mean all the life on Earth. Let's really just life, not the planet itself. I'm not saying the planet couldn't have been engineered, but we don't need to go that far. Let's just say that Earth and all the life on Earth was engineered. One of the interesting things about life on Earth is, for some weird reason, We have plants that grow specifically to create certain kinds of biochemicals. So, for example, why the hell does an opiate plant exist? Like, it's a weird plant, especially if you're an evolutionist. Really doesn't make sense that an opiate plant would ever evolve like that. Doesn't make sense. But the opiate plant would make sense if you look at it from an engineering perspective. And no, I don't mean a god engineer. I'm just talking about a biological engineering feat. That's it. And that it's entirely scientifically possible. There's nothing unscientific about this concept, right? Okay, anyway. So, for example, if we look at humans, for whatever reason, we have opiate receptors. If you wanted to control a human population, you could technically do it through opiates. And of course, we do indeed have historical precedents for that happening. But let's just say you engineered all these life forms. Why would humans have, evolution makes no sense in this perspective. But if you wanted to control a human and you engineered some sort of an opiate, receptive situation and a withdrawal situation if you don't get your fix, that allows you to have control over that particular creation. In this case, it could potentially give you control over a human population, as long as you're in control of a plant that simply grows opiate that you would feed to the people. Right? It's fascinating, right? Because if you're an engineer, what's a great way to manufacture? If you can just have your chemicals grown and you don't have to do anything, all you have to do is throw some seeds in the ground and just let the sun and water take care of the rest. That's fantastic. That is hands-off production. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is go harvest it. It's done for you, right? So a stone softening plant would also make sense from an engineering perspective as well. If you need to manipulate stone, why not design a plant that would have the correct properties that you could then use as a tool to accomplish a stone molding? I'm just saying, it's just the perspective. I know it's probably not said very well right there, but that's my point, is that if you look at it from an engineering perspective, stuff like plants being usable makes a lot of sense, especially from a logistical side. Because like I said, you can just set and forget plants. You can just let them go and they'll just grow for you. You don't really have to waste your time, especially in certain climates. Anyway, so there is maybe interesting precedents for a reason why a plant like this would ultimately exist. So that's a good segue into the science behind this plant. So let's ask the question. All right, fine. That maybe makes some sense, but that's, it's not proof. And I agree, it's not proof. It's just interesting. But has anybody attempted to try to figure this out scientifically? Why not, right? I'm sure that some company somewhere would be interested in this particular situation. And I'm sure companies have actually probably maybe even figured it out and we just don't know it. But there have been other scientists, independent scientists, that have gone out of their way to try and see if they could prove that it's possible. And sure enough, there actually are scientists that did just that. So I'll just read this little paragraph from what these guys found. Dr. Davidovitz, or I guess that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, he wrote a huge paper on it, and it looks like they actually experimented with it, and then they even presented it at a geological meeting. And what they presented was stone that they had actually melted down using their new little liquid that they had extracted and created. And then were able to mold the stone, right? So here we go. I'll just present the results. We present here the first results on plant extracts on the dissolution or disaggregation of calcium carbonate containing rocks, biotooling action. The feasibility of chemically working calcium carbonate with various carboxylic acids found in plants, acidic, oxalic, and citric acid, has been studied. Maximum biotooling action is obtained with a solution containing vinegar, oxalic acid, citric acid. The great surprise was actually to discover very ancient references to their use since Neolithic times for working materials which are very hard but easily attacked by acids, such as chalk. Thus, a bas-relief from the tomb of Mera at Saqqara in Egypt shows the hollowing out of Egyptian alabaster. vases by a liquid contained in a water skin or bladder. Oh yeah, isn't that interesting? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, those vases down there, they think they've got them on lathes and stuff. These guys are willing to... Wow. They're actually putting the liquid in a bladder. Huh. I guess that would work too. An experiment of interest was to compare the biotooling technique with the shaping of a hole using a steel tool and the quartz sand technique recommended by prehistorians. The hole resulting from sand abrasion has rough walls, whereas biotooling gives a smooth finish. What do you want from me? I mean, there you go. We have scientists that went out of their way to test all of this, explain their results, and even show them in a scientific environment. So this stuff is being done. It's just not gaining any traction. One other little tidbit for the stone softening, and then we'll move on. Apparently, witch doctors actually still use the stone softening techniques to make their little statues. So it's still being used today here and there, apparently. So if we look at the perspective of, hey, you know, our ancestors didn't carve these things. You know, they didn't sit there chiseling away with copper tools. All they had to do was soften the stone and mold them. Suddenly, these megalithic structures become more manageable. Even more interesting is that when we look at like really huge blocks, it begs the question, you know, how the hell did they lift and get those things there? Well, what if you had this stone softening solution, you know, you dump it or soak it onto a bunch of rocks, and then you literally just grab chunks with your hand and carry it over to the wall and start, you know, stacking it up and packing it on, right? I mean, you could literally build as big of a rock as you would want. All you have to do is just, you know, carry over small loads and pack it together. Just a suggestion. I'm not saying this is how they did it. But isn't this interesting that this may actually be a possibility, and at the end of the day, it's completely backed up by real science. And people are actually trying to do this stuff, right? So there's the stone softening technique, and holy crap, this is going on for 12 million years. Yeah, I think we're going to call it here in just a sec. But all right, so we'll make another part. There's still some other processes that I want to cover. Processes such as levitation, either by sound or maybe even mentally. You know, we'll get into some of that. We'll look into that. That's worth looking into. I also want to get into the geopolymers in part 2. That's an incredible... that geopolymers are becoming very, very interesting, and there's a lot to cover there. So if I kept talking, this show would just be rambling on for 12 million more years. And while I may have time for that, since everything sucks, you probably do not. So we'll cover part 2 about part 2 of these things in the next part of part 2, which will essentially just be geopolymers. Well, let's do this. If you finish watching this garbage and want to suggest something else before I make the next video, feel free. I won't make the next video immediately so that we can space this garbage out, so that we don't get burned out, and so that we can stay fresh. All right, so yeah, we're going to keep going later.